James Harden has apparently made it known that he might want out of Houston. Russell Westbrook not exactly happy there as well. There was speculation that the Rockets may try and blow this up just because of their financial situation. They're clearly a tier 2, tier 3 type of team, not a team that you would expect to come close to competing in the West right now. And they don't have much ability to maneuver with the trade they made for Russell Westbrook. They're out of draft picks, they're out of salary cap space. So now it's about time to blow this thing up. Russell Westbrook and Harden, again, both saying they're not happy. And it seems as though, at least in Harden's case, that the Brooklyn Nets and the Philadelphia 76ers are two of the top teams on his wish list.
Absolutely, and I will say, just our ability to study the Nets being so close to them in New York, you can see why someone would want to be a part of that culture. It's just fun to watch them. It's fun to talk about the Nets right now. It's exciting. There's something in the air. But in terms of the Rockets, and I'm thinking about their fans right now because they must feel really defeated and disappointed because this is a weird time. They must really feel in a corner. These two former MVPs don't want to play for them anymore. There's a changing of the guards in the front office. So, but I advise them to have patience and understand that losing these two guys is probably the best thing that's going to happen for them for a little while, to open up that cap space and to have faith that this is for the betterment of the franchise. Why would you want guys playing on your team who don't want to play there? And Harden and Westbrook are, in terms of the environment of that team, they needed each other in order for things to work. So the removal of one, you kind of got to get rid of the other. So I think the fact that the two of them have decided it's time for them to leave Houston is for the betterment of the Rockets. So almost good for them.
I think from Houston's perspective, Russell Westbrook is certainly somebody you can move off of. But at the same time, I'm doing whatever I can to try and keep James Harden because I think he's one of the best players in the NBA. That's no secret. He is.
Yeah.
He's been in MVP contention. So that's where I sit on that. It's just difficult because they don't have a lot of room to make moves. And maybe if they were able to trade Russell Westbrook, they could potentially make a play for somebody when free agency comes around and they feel like there's somebody who's good to pair with James Harden in a future year and accelerate the rebuild because you've already got the one star in place. But if James Harden doesn't want to be there, it also puts them in a difficult spot because $50 million a year talks pretty loudly and he just turned that down. So at some level, if he wants to move on, the Rockets may or may not have a choice to do that as well. And it would be really interesting to me to see him play somewhere else. I would be fascinated by either of those destinations, be it the Nets or Philadelphia, in particular the Nets, to see how the heck that would work out with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and James Harden and one basketball. That to me would be a sight to see with a first-year head coach. Mike D'Antoni's there. There's a lot to unpack with Brooklyn if that were to happen. Philadelphia may be a better spot for him because Ben Simmons is a guy who facilitates, but is not the biggest shooter. So he's going to look to try and make plays. And this is not to say that one of Ben Simmons or Joel Embiid wouldn't be going the other direction for Philadelphia because they don't have a ton of draft capital either. And it may stand to reason that one of those guys would have to go to get Harden coming back the other way. But let's pretend that they're able to pull it off with the nuts and bolts of Philadelphia's roster still in place. I think as a distributor, Ben Simmons can play well with James Harden and the role that Joel Embiid can flourish in as a big man, and he'll get his touches in the post and can extend and as a rebounder make his impact when he's healthy. But it just seems to me that Brooklyn would be such a difficult fit for three guys who just make their money, and they're great players. And it's not to deny that they wouldn't be a great team, but at some point there's only one basketball. And are you really reducing the effectiveness of one of those players. We saw this with Chris Bosh in Miami. We saw this with Kevin Love in Cleveland talking about big threes. There are just some guys who aren't necessarily meant to play off the ball. And it doesn't feel like one of Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, or James Harden are one of those guys. It worked great in Golden State because Klay Thompson doesn't need to handle the ball. He's a big catch and shoot guy and can do it that way. Those guys aren't that same type of player. And it feels like you're really risking diminishing the effectiveness of one of those guys in favor of bringing along another star.
Absolutely, and I'll make this quick in that, for one thing, like you were saying, Harden going to Brooklyn, that turns that whole situation into a media conglomerate in itself that you and I, growing up in the late 2000s, early 2010s, have become quite accustomed to. But let's be honest with ourselves. What James Harden wants right now is to win. He wants that championship, and I think you're right in saying if he wants to win right now, I think the 76ers is the best option. There's just too much going on in Brooklyn for it to happen right away. It's just not going to happen that first year. So, but the 76ers have so much talent, and if they can keep everything together, that might be the place to be.
It will certainly be interesting. I don't want to say that Brooklyn's not a good destination because at the end of the day, like James Harden, Kevin Durant, and Kyrie Irving is as good as it gets. I mean, those are three of the top 10 players in the NBA. I don't know that Kyrie is a top 5, but he's definitely a top 10. Yeah. So Harden and Durant are top 5. So that's 3 of the top 10 and 2 of the top 5. That is incredibly difficult to contend with. There is going to be no team that runs out a roster even close to that, even as good as the Lakers were this year. LeBron and Anthony Davis as good as they are. That's Kyrie, Harden, and KD. That's as good as it gets. It's just, do you feel like they're going to be happy? They're going to be willing to play that style of basketball. And Klay Thompson and Steph Curry were the glue in that big three. Guys who are unselfish, who want to shoot the basketball, and they're not as ball dominant. That's not to say that Steph Curry doesn't handle the ball, but he's a guy who will shoot. Klay Thompson is really just a catch and shoot guy, and Kevin Durant is a perfect fit with all 3 of them there. I just think it's going to be more of a challenge with those 3 if you put them together, and that Philadelphia, for James Harden being as effective of a player as he can be, Philadelphia has to be the better destination. That said, I think that Brooklyn's the better team in those 2 scenarios.
Absolutely. I think, like, in terms of next year, the Nets are, it's like the Beatles, where, you know, John has his songs that he writes and he wants to do those songs. Paul has the songs that he writes, he wants to do those songs. They got to fight over when are they going to do each other's songs. Then George is like, hey, I want to write songs too. And John and Paul are like, stay out of this, George. And then Ringo is Mike D'Antoni because he's just there. So it becomes an issue, and, you know, you can have all the talent you want, but at the end of the day, there needs to be a glue that's there, and obviously it's not there yet in Brooklyn. If they can figure it out this year, great. And if James Harden is there, then good for him, and actually good for all of us because that'd be entertaining to watch. But not so sure just yet.